Hello, everyone. We're still going strong in Proverbs 1. We're going to look at the next section, verses 8 through 19. We've moved on from the introduction, it seems like, and we're probably going to have a very different kind of conversation. So I've been looking forward to it. Hope you are too. Let's go ahead and read the full text all together, and then we'll see how far we can get. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head, and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Man, this is a very dramatic change in tone, right? From what we were looking at the intro. The intro has a lot of hope. It has a lot of structure. It's laying out kind of the roadmap of where we're going. But now this is giving us a very different view on the way life can go. So let's break it down verse by verse. Hear, my son, your father's instruction. My son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. So I circled my son because that immediately strikes me as unique, right? My son. That is so personal. My son. It's relational, it's personal, and this is right when we kind of finish that full section, you get this sort of ominous, this very serious tone that's different from the beginning. But this one line, this one verse, is actually a very distinct change in tone as well, isn't it? Because who is Solomon talking to in the introduction? Well, he's kind of just talking to everybody, right? It's real general. He's talking to the simple. He's talking to the wise. He's talking to the youth. He's talking to those with understanding. He's talking to the haves and to the have-nots. But now he's saying, my son. This has become very relational, very personal. And especially because we could point out, your father's instruction, your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. This is really sweet. And it seems like there might be a lot here, because we want to start to ask the question, okay, why? Why the switch to personal? Why are we suddenly now more relational than we were before? And why are we talking about fathers and mothers? I mean, right, there are other people in our lives who teach us things. So why fathers and mothers? And then we might ask ourselves, why are we hearing our father's instruction and forsaking not our mother's teaching? And are these two things different, right? Is a father's instruction really different from a mother's teaching? So what's going on with their sort of individual contributions and how we relate to those? So what is our relationship to those unique contributions? and we should probably go ahead and finish the sentence just to make sure we remain on track. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. For they. Who's they? Or what's they, right? Because it seems like you have two options. Is it your father and mother, or is it their instruction and teaching? They are a graceful garland for your head, and I should probably be doing it like this. Graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. Those are pretty interesting descriptions. The instruction and teaching are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. But is that true? Right, that's the question that's ringing around in my head. Is that true? Haven't we all seen situations where, maybe a mom and dad or give really good teaching, but the child doesn't take it, right? They don't follow that instruction. And then how could that instruction and teaching be a garland? Are they just covering up the garland? Are they taking it on? Are they taking it off? So it seems like, well, let's phrase this as a question instead, and we'll get to it. What is this? Well, I'm just going to put, what does this mean? What's our relationship to it? Because that's certainly not obvious to me. Maybe it's obvious to some of y'all, but it's not obvious to me. So we'll have to work our way through a lot of this. As I'm looking at it, we may actually only make our way through verses 8 and 9, even though we ended up reading the whole section, but we'll see. We just have a lot of questions to get through. Okay, so let's start with the first one. And this is probably the broadest question. Why the switch? And so some of our other questions actually may end up helping us answer this one. And so we may come back to it. But as we're thinking about it initially, so we've gone from a general introduction that's addressing a lot of different kinds of people to a very personal moment. Hear, my son, your father's instruction. He's talking directly to his son, but directly to the reader, right? Directly to you and to me. So he's making this very personal connection. And that actually seems really consistent. Okay, so if you've watched the other videos, we have actually talked about how the process of wisdom, right? Here it is right here. The process of wisdom is taking it into yourself, being changed, understanding, being changed, but ultimately it's giving. And so now that he's sort of outlined the process, now it's like he's entering more fully into that giving step. Now he's showing us what that step looks like in practice. He's saying, hey, now I'm not just talking to anyone, I'm talking to you because I care about you and I care about your life. Hear, my son. And so when we think about it sort of as this principle of the process of wisdom, right, this sort of natural next step, we don't have to be off-put necessarily by the fact that he's saying, my son, right? Because it's talking to anyone who is seeking after wisdom, who's open to receiving it, who doesn't have it. And my son is more of a proxy, right, for demonstrating a close relationship, a desire or a demonstration of a deep love for you. Here, my son, someone who means something to me, your father, someone who should maybe mean something to you, father's instruction. So he's demonstrating the giving step. He's showing us that wisdom ought to be relational in the giving. And, maybe there's a certain practicality here of just perking up our ears. He's not just talking to people now he's talking to you. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, your mother's teaching, etc. So, there's a rhetorical element. There's a process-related element, right? A sort of modeling element. And so I'll write those two things down. He's modeling for us. He's maybe using a rhetorical strategy. But I think there's also just, and maybe you could tell me I'm reading too much into this, but maybe there's just sort of a genuine care here, right? Maybe in this moment, he's reminding us that he's not just an instructor, but he's a person. He's a person who really cares about people, who wants to love them, because that's the kind of person wisdom makes you, someone who wants to change other people's lives because wisdom has changed your life. So I think there's something really genuine here. Okay. So, hear, my son, your father's instruction. And we probably need to consider this word here, and see if there's any relationship to some of the other verses. And you see there, hear, let the wise hear and increase in learning. Let the wise, that's the same one. To know wisdom, instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive. Okay, well, I only remembered the one then, to let the wise hear and increase in learning. And he says, hear, my son, your father's instruction. So there's also maybe an indication here that hey, if you listen up, right? I'm there. Okay, yeah. So if you listen up, there's something you're going to get. But there's also an implicit assumption here, right? The wise hear and increase in learning. There's also an assumption of okay, you're on your way, right? I'm not necessarily just talking to the simple person. I'm talking to the wise man too. So we get that double-faceted moment here as well. Because, right? Okay, so this is really interesting. We have this very double-faceted moment. Okay, talking about here. Because we are referencing back to verse 5, where he's talking to the wise. And maybe even referencing back to that initial stage of the process, right? How do we get knowledge? We have to hear it. How do we get words? We have to hear them. But then he says, my son. And the my son, even though, a son-father relationship can happen at any age, there is implicit in that relationship youth. Right? Because the son necessarily, unless you're God the Son, the son is necessarily younger than the father. The father is speaking into the life of the youth. He's setting us up by this passage to be humble, right? Which is the key to, like we said last time, is the key to actually hearing, receiving, and being changed. So, wow, this verse is actually doing a lot of work. These short phrases, because he's reminding us of our youth in comparison to him. And this is allowing us, or he's setting us up to be in the posture. So it's set up for the posture of humility, right? And that's really interesting because he's putting in a lot of effort, because this warning is very serious, right? Because we noted right at the beginning of the video, there's a intensive tone change here. And there's two tone changes here, the relational one and the sort of more ominous, serious one. But he's using the relational tone change in order to prep for the more ominous tone change, right? He's preparing our hearts by saying, hey, remember, I really care about you. So here's this very serious thing that you need to listen up to. amazing. I mean, just really amazing. Uh, yeah, I love that. Okay, man, who would have expected we were gonna get this much out of "Hear My Son"? The Bible is incredible. All right, let's keep going. So the next question we looked at was why fathers and mothers, and a father's instruction and a mother's teaching. So these two questions are probably pretty related. Why fathers and mothers, and what is our relationship to their unique contributions? These are these are seem related. Um, but why fathers and mothers? Well, he's established this personal connection, right, by saying my son. And now he's talking about a father and a mother. Because this, you know, we all have different experiences of family life, of having fathers, of not having fathers, of having mothers, of not having mothers, for whatever reason. They may or may not be present in our lives. But in the sort of ideal scenario, right, a father, and we could probably, you know, put in parentheses a spiritual father, right, a spiritual mother can play this role. But in a more ideal scenario, a father's instruction and a mother's teaching, these are the most foundational lessons that you can have, right? Because we could say, oh, well, this is probably just talking about, moral lessons and whatnot. But that's not all fathers and mothers teach, is it? They teach you quite literally how to talk. They teach you quite literally how to be a person, how to live in society. And so the father's instruction and the mother's teaching are sort of these most basic elements of living. But better than that, it's the most basic elements, hopefully, of living well, right? Your father and mother are meant to be examples of the kind of life that you might like to live, of the kind of life that you could live, and then maybe you could live even better than, right? Because they're giving you a head start. So why fathers and mothers? Well, these are the most foundational lessons, and what goes along with that is that these are the first lessons. And this is another good reason, right, to kind of remind us of how we are all youth in some way. These are the first lessons, and you never move beyond these first most basic lessons. Without getting too far down the rabbit trail, you could say that a lot of the problems modern society has, but societies from across history have had, are due to the fact that they refuse to just adhere to the basics. Right? And you could, we've done this a lot, but you really could compare it to the gospel. Right? You never move beyond those basic tenets of the gospel. Even when you're a spiritual baby on spiritual milk, right, and you're being growing and you're nourished, and then you start to take on meat, whatever stage of that process you're in, at no point are you beyond the foundational lesson of the gospel, right? That God took on flesh, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, for your sake. He lived a perfect life and he died on the cross so that you could live with him. And he rose again so that you could live with him for eternity, so that you could be in relationship with him for eternity. He made a way where there was no way, for all sinners, for each one of us. And you never move beyond that. And the most basic, and all of the myriad of lessons that really teaches us. And those really are endless. But this is everything, right? By the nature of being foundation, this is what everything gets built upon. How everything else is built is by virtue of these lessons. But here's the deal. We could talk about basic family units and the way God has sort of set this up for us in this 2-parent, 1 child and a child relationship. There's maybe a lot there. But something that I think is really drawing me is that last question. What does this mean? What's our relationship? I'm so intrigued by the graceful garland and the pendants for your neck. Because it seems to me that they are only those things if you keep them. That's what I was sort of alluding to earlier when I started this train, but I wanted to wait until we were sort of fully developed into the verse. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. But only if you put them on, right? That's why he's saying here, forsake not. And I think that forsake not is really, really key. Obviously, the hearing is too, for a myriad of reasons, many of which we've already stated in previous videos. But the forsake not, I think, is probably the key to making them graceful garlands for your head and pendants for your neck. These teachings seem so simple. They seem so basic. They seem like the things you want to get beyond, right? They seem simple, just like I said, basic. And that makes you want to go beyond. You just want to move on. You want to get past, you want to get to the good stuff. You want to get to the fancy stuff, the exciting stuff. But the reality is that most people are, at least at some point in their lives, are completely willing to abandon these lessons. The most basic principles of living. The most basic principles of morality. People are willing to just move on from these. And there's no way then that those people have a graceful garland around their neck, or a graceful garland on their head and pendants around their neck. That's just not how it works. These lessons only become beautiful if you keep them with you. The teaching and the instruction that you're getting, the instruction that you're hearing, the teaching that you're not forsaking, right? They become transformed by time. The longer you have them, the more beautiful they are, I think, right? They are only garlands and pendants if you keep them on you. And so there's this beauty in perseverance, in steadfastness, in faithfulness. They become these ways of showing people that you are different, but also that your life is more glorious in a way. And it may be subtle, right? These things are not necessarily crazy or flashy. They're just beautiful. And they say, hey, I'm set apart in some way. And really, it wasn't by doing anything particularly special. It was just by holding on to the teaching and instruction. It was allowing those things to adorn you, because they have to be put on. And we can't emphasize that enough. Just like looking in the last video, we have a choice to be wise or to be a fool, right? Those are paths that we can take. Well, so too do we have the choice to hear our Father's instruction and forsake not our mother's teaching, or not. We can forsake it. We can not listen to it. But then we'll miss out on the beauty. We'll miss out on how they can adorn and enrich. Oh, and I think that is a good word. They enrich our lives. They make them more beautiful than they would be otherwise. And what is amazing is that they actually are simple. Okay? This is true. They are simple and basic. But when you hold on to them, they are transformed into those things which enrich our lives and adorn us as beautiful. And as you can see, I have run out of room on this notes page. There's a few spots that I could go to, but we're probably going to go ahead and wrap up here because these verses were so rich. This was such a pivotal transition point. Right? So let's remind ourselves. We're making this transition to a more relational and personal interaction because he's saying, my son. And he wants us to hear what he's saying. And when he puts us in this twofold, right, this call to hear and calling him my son, he's trying to be relational, and he's modeling for us. He's using a rhetorical strategy, but he's also, I think, being a really genuine, loving voice here. But perhaps even more importantly than any of those things, he's setting us up for a posture of humility because he's talking to the wise and to the youth. Because he said, hear, which is a reference to the verse that commands the wise to hear. But then he also says, my son, which is immediately putting us in the role of younger, right? Of youth, of the one who doesn't have what they need. And this should place us in a posture of humility. And so then he goes on to talk about the nature of fathers, a father's instruction and a mother's teaching. Well, what do fathers and mothers teach us? They teach us those foundational first lessons that allow us to build everything else, right? So this is the cornerstone. And people, being people, tend to want to move on, to go beyond what's simple and basic. But what's incredible is that these are transformed by time, that the beauty comes in the perseverance. And these things that we have the option to keep off or to put on, well, if we hold on to them and we put them on, then they'll actually enrich and adorn our lives and make them more beautiful than they would be otherwise. And again, this is a fascinating setup for what's coming next, right? Where now we're going to talk about in the next section here. This reference to my son again, right? We're going to transition from this sort of very personal, intimate, encouraging moment, right? To, hey, now we have to understand how to deal with sinners, right? Because you're not the only one in this world, right? We talked in previous verses about wise dealing, so now we need to talk about that. But we used this relational section, this passage, to prepare that conversation to be more powerful and effective than it would have been otherwise. And so hopefully it will be more powerful and effective than it would have been otherwise for us. And I look forward to continuing that conversation with you when we get there. See you in the next video.